Welcome, Eragon fans, to Brizinger and Eragon podcast, a podcast here on the Gazebo Effect Network. We're available on all the platforms and on YouTube. I'm your host, Spencer. Unfortunately, Abby's not with us today. She had a family emergency, but our co-host is with us today for our first Eragon book review, and that is David. And so if you didn't listen to our intro episode, go back and listen to that when you can. Get out. No, I'm just kidding.
No, for real, get out.
But the part you might have missed, or you might have missed this part from the episode, is that David is a complete nuanced, complete newbie to the Eragon universe. And so when we're going through our book reviews like this, we have I almost called you Eragon. I still have a cold. We have David here to give us a complete new experience and a fresh set of eyes, but also like an adult set of eyes on what this book is ultimately. This specific first book, I would say, is more young adult fiction than the other ones, but they're all young adult in differing, varying ways. So I asked this last week, and I said I was going to ask it to every new person that comes on the podcast. So, David, what's your favorite Eragon book?
Honestly, Inheritance is probably my favorite book right now, I would say.
Do you know which one Inheritance is?
The fourth one?
It is the fourth one. That's good.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, got it.
That might be a hot take. I don't even know. People like Inheritance, but it's like, yeah, that one. I mean, it's the Return of the King of the Eragon series, if that helps you. And then your favorite character?
Right now,
you've read 10 chapters, so
I have read 10 chapters. What's his name? Brom? Yeah, Brom. Yeah, I like him a lot. What's funny is that I'm listening to the audiobook version, and when he
Gerard
does
Doyle.
the voice for, yes, he's pretty great. I looked him up because I could have sworn like his Brom voice is very similar to Alec Guinness's Obi-Wan Kenobi, actually. And so I looked him up just to see, man, did he do Star Wars Rebels when Obi-Wan was on it for that one episode? And he wasn't, but very similar.
I think it's also his natural voice is pretty like old man. He's an old man British guy. And I love watching. There's some clips of him reading the books, and he's one of those things where if you listen to someone speak so much, when you actually see them in person speaking, it's like unnerving.
Yeah,
it was 100% like that. Like when just really any audiobook reader or podcaster that you've listened to a lot of, and you see their faces, it's kind of unnerving or uncomfortable. I don't think everyone feels that way about that, but that phenomena was something else to behold.
Yeah.
But real quick, just going through some things from a little bit of review from last week, but this podcast is dedicated to doing a full dive into Allegasia, which David, Allegasia is just the map background here. That's all Allegasia.
Yeah, I got that part.
Yeah. And then the inheritance cycle and beyond. There are many fantasy world podcasts out there that usually do one of three things: read the books, watch the movies, or talk about lore. We're attempting to do all three. Obviously, there's only one movie, so eventually we will watch that movie. David, have you seen the movie?
I've not, but I've not heard great things about it. More from you. So.
Yeah, I think I might talk too much trash. I think people like it, but like in a sense that people like The Sorcerer's Apprentice starring Nicolas Cage. Like it was fun, but it's like if you're a fan of.
Listen, I'm a fan of dumpster fires. If you're a fan of dumpster fires, this is the one with Nicolas Cage. This one to watch.
Yeah.
Is that the
Fun
vibe?
story. Fun story. Our friend Cole, who will be on the podcast someday, I'm sure, he was at like this Hollywood Museum thing. Do you remember those pictures he sent to us from there?
Yeah.
Anyway, he sent me a picture of they had Nicolas Cage's like jacket and outfit from National Treasure. And we're on a rabbit trail, but it's fine. And then he said they also had the Sorcerer's Apprentice jacket, but I hated that movie, so
Wild.
I didn't send a picture of that
Wild.
one. And I said sad. Um, but yeah, so we're gonna try to talk about all three. We haven't seen the movie, but David, I think you might be more infuriated because you're reading the book first. Um, yeah, I don't think the movie does do some things, like the king Galbatorix, which read his name a couple times so far. He's
Hmm.
not. He doesn't. You don't see him for a while. He does not make an appearance in the first book. Spoiler
Yeah.
alert, I guess. And the very first thing
Runner.
that happens in the movie is you see Galbatorix, played by John Malkovich, which was a casting for sure. Um, it's definitely one way of looking at it. And so people were just like, "What?" It was a little Percy Jackson Sea of Monsters in that way, where they kind of
Oh,
tried to jump
great. Love
ahead,
that.
but they didn't. I don't think there's any spoilers in it that for the rest of the series, mostly because the third and fourth book had not come out yet.
Hmm.
And the second book came out less than a year before the movie came out, so like there was nothing to spoil.
Right.
Yeah. And then do you know how many books there are?
Uh, I read the biography, and I think it was originally supposed to be three, but he made it four,
Correct.
and then it
Yeah.
it went from a trilogy to that's why he called it the cycle.
Yes, it's the inheritance cycle. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the word inheritance has a lot of different connotations with Aragon and that idea. But none of the titles, except maybe Aragon,
Hmm.
um, really come into play in the book. It's not like, wow, this is the big title moment. Um,
Yeah.
and it's one of those things that you just talk about them and you're like, wait a second, I know what this title means now.
Yeah.
Then when you've read all of them. But yeah, so there's Aragon, Eldest, Brisingar, and Inheritance, and then
Isn't there a Murtaugh book that just
yes,
came out or
Murtag.
something?
Yeah, it's Murtag, which
It's gonna
um
be my Hagrid.
a lot of a lot of people. Oh, what?
I said that's gonna be my Hagrid.
Yeah, that's okay. So many people were convinced, even though when there's videos of Christopher going, no, his name's pronounced Murtag, people go, no, it's not.
Why'd he just throw the H in there then?
It's a Norse thing, probably.
I guess so,
He's a
yeah.
big nerd on that stuff.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, Murtag has a solo book, and then the Fork, the Witch, and the Worm is like it's Tales from Allegasia. It's like three short stories, but it's pretty good. Um, so and then he's working on his sixth book, but the
Hmm.
cycle is like its own thing, and then Murtag is its own thing. Um, it's kind of setting up. He's still setting up the big next cycle or next
Yeah.
trilogy or whatever that's going to be. Um, but yeah, so as I said last week, I'm definitely advising David you to avoid the internet on some amount. I think it's just stay off Reddit.
Yeah.
Partly
Yeah, because I don't
because
have TikTok
Christopher.
no more. I deleted
Well,
the
yeah,
app, so
and
I
partly
can't get it back.
because me too. I did that too. Christopher Polini directly responds to fans
Hmm.
on everything, but TikTok, the Eragon subreddit, which has been really entertaining actually. It's just reading people's random questions and then
Hmm.
Christopher Bellini, the real it's like the real Christopher Bellini. He's like, yep, or nope. Uh, but he has very little regard to spoilers about the inheritance cycle, which I mean, he wrote the books and the fourth one came out in 2011, so it's been
Yeah.
around for a bit. But let's jump into chapters 1 through 10. David, I'm gonna ruin this for you, and I'm gonna ruin this for Abby too. Something I think Christopher Paolini's favorite word in the entire universe is the word thump. And
Mm.
so we're gonna do something that no Aragon podcast has done, which I'm gonna
A
count
thumb
the
count?
number of. I'm gonna have a thump count. Yeah,
Mm.
because I've noticed every time I've read it, I'm like, good night. I think there's a chapter in Murtag where he uses thump like 3 or 4 different times, and these
Mm.
chapters aren't that long. So I'm like, Chris, we had 3 thumps and 1 thwump, which doesn't count, but it's an honorable mention.
Yeah.
So there's my funny little tidbit for this. Um, but yeah, so just to mention, David, what are your overall thoughts on the first 10 chapters here?
Yeah, I think I'm in a better headspace now to read it than I was the first time.
Yeah, because I did talk
Uh,
David into reading it another time. I tried to.
and yeah, and I think I was like, I jumped on it prematurely instead of actually like, because I think whenever we were reading it, it was like the busy time of my year. And so it was like I was rushing to try and meet the deadline to read it, but then I couldn't be on because I was so busy. So it was kind of like, and I just kind of rushed through the end that I don't even remember like the majority of the book. So now it's just like, yeah, we're breaking it off into 10 chapters. It's been easier to read and to figure out. I love the story. I think I can agree that there are elements of within the hero's journey that is used on the surface, but then Christopher, what he does is that he still continues to make it his own. Like it's not so much to where he's like creating like the same story, the same. I think maybe the structure or the initial creation of the character, especially for Aragon, is similar to the hero story, but like he makes it unique and he makes it stand out in his own way that doesn't just feel like a rehashing of it, you know? And so the first 10 chapters I think are done really, really well. I think he establishes the character and the world building has gone very, very well. And it flows naturally. Like the fact that Brahm is the one who kind of he's like, well, let me tell you a story about um like just a story of lore, of history. And it's literally just the breakdown of how did we get to this point, right? But it's a very, very easy and clear and smoothless transition into that story that it doesn't feel forced or even out of place. And so I think Christopher does a great job so far of making everything flow well together. And like you said, there's probably been hundreds of revisions that have happened since it was released the first time.
Yeah,
But
depending on what copy
so
you have, yeah,
yeah,
it's crazy. Because he
which and
said
I
he
don't know
revised it
what
again.
version is like the audiobook version. I don't know what edition that
That's
happens to
version
be,
2.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
so there's 3 official published versions. So he did the self-published version, and then there's the published version, which is the audiobooks and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
this one's 60 pages less than the original.
Hmm.
Um, and then he revised it a little bit again because they came out with the illustrated edition for the
Hmm.
20-year anniversary in 2023. I was going to say last year, but basically last year, 2 years ago. And so he did say he revised it a little bit again. And I think the tropes are a little bit out of the fact that he was a completely brand new writer at age
Hmm.
15 or 16. And as I will say, this is in my rankings, this is my bottom, not in
Hmm.
I would say my least favorite. I would just say like, yeah, it's literally the least of my favorites, which is all of them.
Yeah, but it's
I
more
don't
like
want to say the
because it's the
negative.
starter one, like it's
Yes,
the just the fact it's the first one, and the other ones that he's written so much better as a writer. He's really
he's
developed
really
into his
strong. Yeah, he's
craft.
very
Yeah.
strong. The universe is established. Um, yeah, and the tropes kind of. it becomes way more unpredictable, I should say. Not that this is
Mm.
super predictable either, though.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so part of what I've the fandom is pretty divided on the prologue. I just wanted to touch on it. So the deniers mostly they think that his writing is not consistent with the rest of the book, like almost like the prologue. He was made to write the prologue after the fact because they were thinking that they needed that extra background on why we could say it. The egg got to Aragon,
Hmm.
describing the elves and the shade. I would kind of agree. I think it's unnecessary. I think you can pick up with Discovery Chapter 1 and go straight into it. But what are your thoughts?
Uh,
Pro prologue, anti
I'm pro.
prologue.
I usually like prologues anyway, because some like even if we could have done without it, I still like it because I like having those kind of extra facts and just establishing like, oh, this is going to be a pretty intense book, and we've already seen the bad guys, and we're already seeing the damsel in distress. Again, just kind of that story building kind of feel. Again, it reminds me a lot of A New Hope of just, the Empire of the Star Destroyer coming in on the Tantive 4, Princess Leia sending off the plans to into R2 on Tatooine, and it falls into like I don't know. I just like that kind of stuff, and so I was into it. Um, but yeah, I think it's fine.
David is a big Star Wars fan, and
I
I
am.
did think I did
Yes,
think that
ma'am.
would add an extra very fun layer because if you don't think there are parallels between Aragon and Star Wars, you're a crazy person.
And they're good parallels. Not all parallels are bad.
That's true. That's true. That would be my argument as well. There is no Death Star, David. Spoiler alert.
Correct.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet. Um, but yeah, uh, Durza. Yeah, Durza's the shade. I don't know if they said his name in the prologue. But yeah, he's the main antagonist of this story.
Mhm.
Um, and shades are
Yeah, I don't
just
know if they said
terrifying.
his actual name. I think they just called him the Shade in this.
I think they reveal his name later in the book.
Yeah.
But let's just jump into chapter one. Um, as Abby said last week, and I'm sure she would say if she was here, part of the reason that Christopher, I think, was so successful with uh, empathizing with his readers and connecting with his readers is he writes from what he knows. And so when
Hmm.
he's describing the spine and Aragon going hunting and stuff, that's all stuff that he grew up doing because he
Hmm.
grew up on the sides of the Beartooth Mountains in Montana
Hmm.
and literally like where he lives now with his family, he can like see the mountains outside of his window pretty much.
Yeah.
And so I always felt like with a lot of these books and stuff, it's a little like almost video game-ish a little bit where they're like, well, we're not going to think about what they eat or like, oh, they traveled from this place to this place, which is 700 leagues or whatever. They're like,
Hmm.
okay. It's like, oh, they got on horses and traveled to the next country over.
Yeah.
Whereas this takes the time to like actually, talk about if he goes home empty-handed, his family's going to go hungry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it gets you an idea that Aragon is like special in his own way, that like he can fend for himself and he understands these mountains that most people are terrified of.
Yeah. I think it's also pretty interesting of the fact of how like how he's almost about to finally catch his prey after 3 days, and then here comes this stone, right? That just kind of just ruins it and takes everything out. But it's also, I don't know, it's a fun, to me, it's a fun introductory chapter for Aragon of, hey, we're seeing him doing what he's really, really good at, and then his world's going to turn upside down at the very end. Um, but then it's also like not a kind of thing that he even recognizes, like the stone. is he doesn't realize it's an actual egg. He also doesn't know that it's extremely important. All he knows is that he can sell it to buy food.
I
Um,
love that he almost, for a second, is like, "I'm just gonna leave this in the
yeah,
forest.
he considered
It's
it.
big, it's heavy,
Yeah,
I don't know." I also like this is a slight spoiler, I guess. The spine is the only part of Alagasia Galbatorix could never control. It's like, yeah, right, except there's a whole small nation to the south that seceded and he left alone.
yeah.
Serta,
It's kind of like
which
the Nazareth of this universe. Like, you mean, does anyone really care about this place? He's just
that's
like they
that
left.
is kind of how he feels about it, but yeah, he shouldn't be ignoring Serta that much.
Hmm.
But yeah, and that's not really a spoiler, I guess, because it's literally on the map in the first edition of Eragon. Like if David opened his book, it'd be right there. Why am I
Hmm.
defending myself? It's fine. But yeah, I love how it isn't a lot of dialogue. It's really just personal experience with Aragon, and you build this connection with this main character from the ground up. Like I don't know if Aragon's my favorite character, but I definitely have I very much understand his character and his growth way more than any other character in the series.
Hmm.
Even though, and I will this will happen later, but this is the only book that's entirely focused on one character.
Hmm.
The other books bounce between characters a little bit, and so he doesn't have as much direct page time. But we
Right.
still we get that one on one experience with Aragon, and I think that's really fundamental. And that is a big uh, bonus point to this book. A big point to this book is how important it is to the series is building that character connection.
Yeah. And what he does is that, and we can keep going after this, but like
Yeah.
the way that he lines up and sets up the chapters, some of them are long, then other ones are really, really short, just to give you, okay, this is just basic information to just move the story along. And
Yep.
it's a great kind of like cleansing your palate a little bit. Like, hey, I just gave you like a whole bunch of information. But now what we're going to do is we're just going to take a little break to just change settings and to change scenes and to move forward. And so this one was as the first chapter is that, all right, here we go. We're just setting up this little bit thing. We're going to move the story along. Chapter two, here we go. Just this boom, let's get into it. So,
And I do like the transition from the prologue to this very
yeah,
quiet
it's a good
first
one.
chapter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chapter two, Palancar Valley. So I'm going to explain briefly why it's called Palancar Valley. Um, so, without going too much into the lore, when the men came to the land of Allegasia, um, one of the first kings was this guy named King Palancar, and he
Hmm.
brought his family to this valley, um, and he created like a kingdom, a small kingdom for himself, and
Yeah.
and so that's where the name of Palancar Valley came from. I won't say anything else about his character because you learn about his story in later books a little bit. Um, but yeah, so yeah, obviously the kingdom went away, and the good empire, and then Galbatorix's empire and stuff had dominion over the valley.
Hmm.
But it's still called Palancar Valley. It's also called Palancar Valley because Christopher really liked the artwork in books that he read growing up from John Palancar, which is just a
Yeah.
guy. And so he named Palancar Valley after him. And then when Random House Publishing got the publishing rights to his book, they actually managed to get John Palancar to do the artwork for the book.
Mm.
And so the artwork
Wow.
for this is actually John Palancar's artwork. So
That's
that's why I
cool.
wanted to tell the story because it's a fun full circle story. Um, but yeah, I um, just for future books or whatever, just laying some groundwork. I find it really interesting the way Aragon feels about Carvajal and how he looks at the houses. He's like, oh, it's just like a patchwork of small brown houses. Um,
Hmm.
he we have a about half the time in the second book we spend with Roran. And so it's a really interesting comparison to how Aragon feels about Carvajal to how Roran feels about Carvajal. Um,
Hmm.
and like the connections they have and don't have with the town. It's not the same. And that's fairly creative. Um, I don't like Sloan.
Yeah,
David, I don't know
he's
how
kind of a
you
turd nugget.
he is. He has a whole fan base. Like
Really?
people really, yeah. He plays a bigger role in the series later.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
yeah, and honestly, you're not going to be able to keep track of all of the townspeople. But pretty much all of the townspeople reappear in the series later on.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, Carvajal is almost a character. The town is almost a character in the series itself in some ways, and Sloane is tied up in that. But yeah, he's just a turn nugget mostly.
Yeah.
And Gerard Doyle does a really good job of his voice and stuff too.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
When I really like Horst as on the other side of things. Horst is kind of an underdone in the I think in the movie he doesn't even have speaking lines. But in the book, I don't know. Have you seen How to Train Your Dragon, David?
I actually just watched it for the first time on this past Thursday. The Fornays were over.
What?
Yeah, the Fornays were over, and I had Aragon on the mind because I had just that's when I did the overlays for it and stuff like that. And so we were kind of going through trying to see which movie we were going to watch, and then I saw How to Train Your Dragon. I said, I've never seen this before, which is hilarious because then when I'm listening to the score of it, I was like, man, I've heard this music like all the time. I've never known it was from this movie. So
Yeah.
I just watched Train How to Train Your Dragon.
Thoughts?
Amazing. I love it. I'm excited to watch the to keep watching them. So thought it was a thought it was a fun one.
The second one was really good too. But anyway, when I imagine Horst, I imagine like Hiccup's dad with the big broad shoulders, just a big box
Me
of a man.
too. Yeah, I
And
did the same thing.
I mean, it's Christopher's description of him. I'm like,
Hmm.
big box man. Got it. And his deep voice too.
Yeah.
Really good stuff. But yeah, I feel like I talked the whole time for chapter two, but did you have any thoughts?
Um, no, not really a lot to I thought it's interesting how Katrina comes in to kind of
Hmm.
she's the which is interesting because especially when they talk later on about Sloane's wife dying in the spine, it kind of gives them not much. It doesn't give him a justification of how he treated Aragon, but it helps you understand a little bit more. But it
Yeah.
also kind of pairs up, and maybe I'm wrong here, but to me, it kind of sets up Katrina as kind of reminding Sloane of his wife and his daughter. That I think will probably come back to play a little bit. But yeah, thought it
Yeah.
was pretty straightforward.
Um, but David's gonna talk more because chapter three is Dragon Tales. Great chapter title.
Love Dragon Tales.
It's the best
Love the
chapter
show.
of yeah, it's the best chapter of this section of chapters for me. But I also equally have the least notes about it.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to know what questions or what thoughts do you have? I can't tell you everything, but
Uh,
it's a lot of exposition and lore.
yeah. I think that I just for the
You can make
initial
wild
part,
predictions too if you want to.
yeah. So I feel like Aragon's mother, Selena, is going to come back into play in this book in particular.
Okay.
Um, I could be wrong about that. Um, I just think
I
that
don't think I don't think she is she referenced in this chapter? She was referenced. I couldn't remember when.
at the very beginning when he's kind of talking about how Aragon ended up on the farm with his uncle and with his cousin.
Oh, okay.
Um,
It was either in this chapter or it does come
yeah,
up in T for two as well.
yeah, and so we're starting to see kind of how his background a little bit, just even being explained. Um, but I think also seeing the little bit of back and forth between the like the people who come in and they support the empire, and then the rest of the entire town village of how they just absolutely just disagree. Um, because it's kind of like one is like you probably should have not expected us to agree with you when you're talking about how great the empire is and this and this and that. Um, but they just didn't get the picture. And then again, when Rom shares the story and he goes in and tells about the dragon riders, just great. To me, like I said, perfectly set up, perfectly well done, perfectly told as well. Um, that the story was captivating. I mean, it was.
He
But then
passes pretty
also
well
like,
as a storyteller.
yeah, he does. And they says, well, he tells stories and he doesn't tell these new stories like, the traders do when they come into town, but it's still captivating and it's still great. Um, but again, it just continues to just set up the next chapter. And like there's a reason why the Dragon Riders are being told here. It's because, hey, listen, this is what Aragon's going to end up being. And so that's pretty cool. Um, but yeah.
Yeah. So,
Also, the fact that it's a forbidden story is pretty cool too, and that Brahms
yeah,
just like, I don't
Garrow's
care.
like, you're lucky you heard this story because he would be killed on sight.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And it definitely, you know, Brahm is very passionate about this story. Um, and then some other things just they actually do reveal we learn more about this story as it goes on. We get
Hmm.
a lot more detail for how certain things happen. Ironically,
Yeah.
I think we learn the most about this story of Brahms in Inheritance, or at least we get the best scope of what happened and how it all went down. Um, but then we also learned that we learn a little bit more about Galbatorix's wanderings um,
Hmm.
in a later book as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, um, it's one of those things where a lot of people they want a prequel about the Dragon Riders at their height. Um, I think it'd be an interesting story, but it'd also kind of be hard to have antagonists because they kept the peace so well that I don't know how
Hmm.
much conflicts there really were. And you can't really have a story without a lot of conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes
I
sense.
really don't know. Um, but yeah, let's move on to chapter 4, Awakening. So part of the reason I think this book specifically works so well is that Aragon is a 15 or 16-year-old, and Christopher also was 15 or 16 years old. Because Aragon's logic is a little silly, just like in the forest where he's like, "Yeah, I'll just leave this stone behind."
Yeah.
And in this, he's like,
Yeah.
I'm so sick of the thing making noise. I'm just gonna go outside and bury it.
Hmm.
Oh, and then when the dragon hatches, he's so in awe. But then 5 minutes later, he's like, I'm gonna have to kill this dragon.
Yeah. Yeah. This to me is a fun little section because obviously, like the dragon comes into play, um, and there is like that moment of hesitation of saying, "Yeah, I should probably kill this thing," but he doesn't have the heart to do it, which is protagonist, great call. Um, and but it just focuses on him just establishing a routine of getting his work done, but then also spending quality time. It reminds me a little bit of Twilight, of the dragon just imprints on Aragon, or Aragon imprints on the dragon, either one. um but because there is a bond that is established here of the feedings, but then also the spending time together, the playing around, that kind of stuff. It just paints this beautiful, beautiful, just introductory into their relationship. So much that then when he finally leaves, because he wants to go talk to Brahm to ask him questions about, owning a dragon and understanding the dragon then calls out to him, like misses him, wants him around, this the kind of thing. Sad, but it's cute at the same time. So yeah, pretty good chapter.
Yeah, I think my favorite part of this chapter is how he specifically takes time to describe the dragon in great detail. It's got leathery
Yeah.
wings, it's got these tendrils, it's like these veins. Um, she like perches on the windowsill and stares at the moon. Like they're very, very noble, very dramatic, even from like birth. Um, and yeah, there is definitely a close connection with Eragon because of the bond, the dragon rider bond.
Hmm.
And she chose to hatch for Eragon, as they'll talk about more about later. But the dragon only hatches for the person that they want to be bonded to. I lost David.
Yeah, he asked me. I
You back? Are you back?
think so.
Okay.
I should be.
Yeah. I was just saying that Saphira
Yeah.
specifically hatched for Aragon. Like she chose
Hmm.
him. And that's
Yeah.
like that's part of the dragons. They only hatch for certain people. Um, at least
Mhm.
I can't get into that. Can't get into that. It's fine. But I think that's part of why we always I feel like most readers would agree that we have the greatest attachment. One of the greatest attachments, like both. But Abby said her favorite character was Saphira last week, and I think part of it is just because we've literally um, been with the character from birth, basically. Um, but yeah, I love how Christopher also, in subtle ways, explains to us that most people of Aragon's day think the dragons are just beasts, like horses.
Yeah.
And that's partly
Hmm.
because other than Galbatorix's dragon Shrukin, no one has seen a dragon for like 100 years.
Yeah.
But let's transition to chapter 5. T for two. Aragon goes down to Brahm's house. I love how Brahm is pointedly described as eagle-like. He's played by Jeremy Irons in the film, if you know who that is, David. Which is a great casting, but also not necessarily Christopher's vision. Christopher's vision is like,
Hmm.
big white beard, hooked nose, gray hair, big staff, kind of almost wizard, but more like
Gandalf.
old
Yeah.
story, but like yeah, but a little bit more like old storyteller type.
Mm.
And part of the reason when he Aragon notes that when he pulled his hood back, he noticed surprisingly gray hair. It's because like he thought it'd be white, but it's not, which alludes that
Hmm.
Brahm is actually younger than he is trying to make himself appear a little bit. Um, so Cole and Tim, friends of the pod, when we did some fan casting for Aragon back in the day on another podcast, they fan casted Brahm as Mark Hamill, and I wanted to know what David your thoughts would be about that.
Um, I feel like if that's the casting, then I think I know what Brahm is going to end up doing later on in this book. Uh,
I'm not, yeah,
at his
maybe.
age. at his age, he so this is my prediction. So at Mark Hamill's age, he's gonna step into the Obi-Wan Kenobi role, which means in this one, Brahm is going to be training Aragon how to be a dragon rider. That's my prediction or
I thought
whatever
you were
it
to say
is.
how to be a dragon.
How to be a dragon. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I think for this one, I think it's a great casting for Brahm. Mark Hamill would be great, I think, for it. Probably the role that he wanted to do more faithfully to legends in Star Wars as Luke Skywalker is to kind of be that mentor role instead of being that, crabby hermit that he ended up
Um,
being. But I think for this one, Brahm does a great job of answering Aragon's questions. I think Aragon does a I don't think it works, but he at least tries to
15-year-old.
not reveal that
Yeah.
he has a dragon. Um, but he asks really great questions of like, how
I
big
heard
are
they could
they?
hear
When
each
do they
other's thoughts.
mature?
I'm like,
Yeah. And he's like, how do you know that? Well, a trader told me. I don't remember what his name was. Well, tell me because um, we gotta get this guy. I gotta figure out what his name. And then we do get the names of it listed here, and the is the last name that's given. And so when I read that and it was the last name, I said, that's their name, the name of the dragon. But yeah,
there's a lot of good names in there though. Um,
yeah,
I don't know if you mentioned Belgabad.
mm-mm,
Uh, super cool. Um, yeah, there's a lot of the dragon names are not consistent, and they're not like they don't follow any kind of rules, I feel like, but they're all very fun. Um,
yeah,
he's done very well in picking all of the dragon names. I don't love Shuriken, but I don't think you're supposed to. I love that
yeah,
Brahm Aragon asks so many questions, and that's kind of part of his character. Like I don't think I'd ever say a character this is like a character trait, but that kid,
hmm
he has so many questions to everyone, everywhere, all the time. And he's like
yeah,
this in every book. And he gets a little better at it as he matures into a man. But
hmm
I love that Brahm not so casually reveals that he's supposed to be dead. And like
yeah,
it's the one time that Aragon fails to ask a question
yeah,
because he calls it a story, and then Brahm's like, story.
hmm
It's like, if this is a story, then the rumors are true, and I am dead, and you are talking to a ghost.
yeah.
Really good stuff. Um, Cole and I actually came up with another fan casting that I really love. I don't know if he'd do it, but Ray Fiennes would be really good.
As Braum,
Yes.
Mhm.
You gotta
I
take him
got to
away.
think
You
on
gotta
it.
take the Voldemort out of Ray Fiennes a little bit
Yeah,
there.
that's what I'm trying to
But
do. I'm trying to do that.
because I think Mark Hamill's too on the nose. I think it's people are gonna draw the parallel lines too much. Um,
Yeah, they
but
can't get
yeah,
over
there's
themselves.
I am really excited for this Disney Plus series. I
Hmm
haven't heard much movement from it in a little while. They're
Yeah,
still in the storyboarding process, and Christopher's one of the screenplay writers, so he's very much
trying to make sure
involved.
it happens. Yeah, trying to make sure it goes right. Take your time.
Yep, yep. That's kind of why I'm not too mad about it. Yeah, chapter 6, A Name of Power. So David so well predicted he knew that Saphira was going to be the name. I like that she says Aragon, and this is kind of Saphira. Gerard Doyle actually in interviews talked about how Saphira has a capricious attitude. Um, like she's a little sassy at times and stuff. And when he sees her, she goes, Aragon. Is that all you can say? Yes.
Yeah,
It just gets me so hard. Um, yeah, Saphira's definitely she's got a lot of wit. Um, one of the wittiest characters in the series. Um, and maybe I don't know, maybe it's just Gerard Doyle understanding the character really well. But how do you feel about the dragon voice?
I don't was I don't love it.
Okay,
It sounds it
it's
sounds
an
too,
adjustment.
yeah, it sounds too, which I mean, can't blame him. This guy's a dude, but it sounds too much like a dude. Uh,
Yeah,
but I can understand that the direction of it. Well, you don't want to make it. I mean, this is supposed to be a dragon, you know. So how how feminine can you make the voice and it be a little bit still threatening? So I get it. I don't love it, but
it's fair.
I get it. But
I
yeah.
don't think all people. I think that's why some people like reading it rather than listening to the audiobooks. It's just because of the
Mhm.
dragon voice. Um, I think it's good. I think it's an impossible task. And he kind
Yeah.
of talked about it, how he's like, I don't know how to make this like alien voice. And he's like, it was a really big fun challenge to like figure out how to make it have like humor and all these. He's like, when I made the voice, I wasn't necessarily thinking about how I'd be able to incorporate humor and feminine and all these other things into
Hmm.
it. Um, yeah, and like
Yeah.
distinguish those things too.
Yeah.
But I think it's yeah, really good stuff. Any other thoughts about A Name of Power?
No, no, it's a pretty quick
I
chapter.
mean,
A
he figures out
chapter.
that she's a female, and that's really all that
Yeah.
happens. Is short, another short chapter, chapter 7. Miller to be, Roran's leaving. Um,
Yeah. And not a lot that happens here. I'm interested to see why he did not put the polished rock that Aragon gave him, why he didn't pack that in. Because that was such a jerk move to do. And Aragon saw it, and I felt bad for him. And I was just like, dude, give me the rock. I'll take it. Like, so, like I felt so bad that he didn't take the rock. And that hopefully they'll explain it, I guess, or something.
I don't know if they touch ever again on that. Um,
Really? That's stupid. Then he's now my I don't know if I like him list then.
oh my gosh, you're gonna change your mind. But I didn't think of it as like a jerk move. I just thought of it as like it was a special thing, and he wanted to come back, and he was trying to only care. He didn't want to be gone too long.
Mm,
I don't know, but maybe you're right.
I don't
I
know.
can tell you,
But we'll
Aragon
see how
gets
I
way
feel
too
towards the end of
busy.
the
He
book.
gets way too busy to think about that rock again.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, chapter 8, Strangers in Carvajal. Um, Uncle Garrow's special blessing is really special. I think it when talking about with Star Wars, like he's he seems to be much closer to Aragon and Roran than Luke Skywalker's uncle.
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah,
Luke
for sure.
Skywalker's uncle is just kind of there. Um, in the same sense that like Wizard of Oz, like Dorothy's aunt and uncle, they're just people she lives with, and then she goes and does her
Yeah.
thing. Garrow's got a little bit more of
It's
a role to play.
yeah, I think for Owen, especially the time that we see him in A New Hope. Like I think they are closer,
I guess we have
but
learned a lot more about that character in the prequels and other stuff, but
well, yeah, I guess in Obi-Wan Kenobi, but I mean also got to remember that he did not want Luke to be like Anakin at all. And in that point in time in Luke's life, he was basically just like his father, of just like always craving adventure, always looking toward the horizon. Um, like clearly did not want to be working with uh like moisture vaporizers or whatever or evaporators. He didn't want to do that. And so that's where we get to see him with Aragon. I feel like the adventure finds him and he just seems to be swept along with the journey. It's not something he's looking for. And so that kind of I think helps in their relationship. Um,
oh yes,
but
Aragon trouble finds Aragon all the time.
yeah. And so
Um,
it doesn't I think with this chapter, Sloane comes back in and just, you know, helps the two strangers out. um, and like sells out Aragon, which is not super fun. And then
Oh yeah,
Brahm finds out about the scar, and so I'm like, he knows.
yeah. He's whistling a merry tune as he walks away.
Yeah.
Um, I think Garrow's Blessing is really special. I mean, it's
Hmm.
written by a 15-year-old, so I think that's pretty clever. Also,
Yeah.
in terms of like, it's some genuinely good advice. Um, but looking at it in hindsight, like Aragon and Roran take these to heart in different ways. Um,
Hmm.
Roran is Garrow's son, literally, and how he acts, but Aragon still
Right.
holds Garrow in that space, even though Garrow is not his father. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, all you know is that Selena is his mother.
Yeah. That's
You
the
don't
only thing
know
I know.
who Aragon's father is.
It's not like I'm on Reddit right now.
Any wild guesses?
No. I'll probably be
None?
more bold and confident next time.
Okay, that's fair. Uh, but that's all good. So chapter 9, Flight of Destiny. Um, so yeah, so Aragon tells Saphira about the strangers. And we'll learn
Yeah,
more
she
about the
freaks
strangers
out.
later. She freaks out. Yeah, 100%. Um, and so part of the thing of part of the lore of this universe is that while she's new and doesn't have all of the things, the dragons have like a certain amount of shared memories, and so she has like uh she knows how to hunt, she knows what things certain things are,
Hmm.
and she also has some of her like her ancestors memories as well, that's passed on like through her parents. And so she
Yeah.
knows who the strangers are because of these shared memories. But she like you learn later kind of like how much does she know, or how much did she know or doesn't know over time with like the person who trains them. And so that's
Yeah.
part of why she knows who these strangers are. And that, yes, I will reference it, listeners. The strangers are a parallel to the Nazgul um, in Lord of the Rings.
Hmm.
Um, but once it's revealed who the strangers really are, um, they're much more original. But they're
Yeah.
kind of filling a certain that part of the story. Um, but yeah, a big part of the magic system in this universe is the battle of the minds, and it
Hmm.
having battles in mindscapes. I'm really interested to see how that will be committed to TV because they don't do it in the film very well. Like they speak telepathically via voiceover, and that I think that's it as far as I can remember. But I've only seen the
Yeah.
movie like once. Um, but yeah, so not only do Aragon and Saphira speak telepathically, but there's like mind battles and stuff like that, and that's kind of part of the magic. But there's
Yeah.
also
We
literal
got
magic going
some
on.
real legitimates going on right now
Yeah,
in this.
for sure. Well, there's a lot of like putting barriers up so people can't enter your mind, but then you're trying to fight
Yeah.
them. But
Hmm.
Christopher handles it with grace, like, and
Yeah.
he leans us into it. We're not jumping straight into it. We learn about it with Aragon and Saphira's minds, and like this is the first kind of battle that you have where he's trying to get through to Saphira so they could not die, like land and all these things. Um,
Hmm.
and I will say, just for future things, like Christopher also handles it with limitations, and explains his limitations pretty well. And so it's
Yeah.
not, yeah. But yeah, Flight of Destiny. That's chapter 10, I guess.
Yeah. So the one chapter that you missed was chapter 5. So there was
Ah,
one in between. Um, it was
good.
before Awakening. It's Fate's Gift. That's chapter
Oh,
4. But that
okay.
again, that one's the one. It's another one where it's like it's very short. I think it's actually only 4 minutes on the audiobook. Like it's not a long section at all, which means it might be only like 1 or 2 pages in like the actual
What
book,
chapter was it
maybe.
after?
It was after um Dragon Tales.
Oh,
But that's basically like literally the only thing that happens in that chapter is Sapphira hatching, essentially.
okay. So I was just rolling that in with Awakening then.
Yeah.
Yep, it's 3 pages.
Yeah. But Flight of Destiny to me, I think it's a great place to kind of end it because it's like, all right, the trouble is now found, Aragon and Sapphira. How are they going to deal with it? Tune in next week to figure out how that happens. That's kind of the vibe that I was getting coming off of it. But
Wasn't the
yeah,
plan. We're doing 10
yeah,
chapters at a time. So,
yeah.
David, any wild predictions about next week?
Uh,
What do you think? What think's going to happen next?
I think um Aragon's uncle is going to be very upset that his house is now destroyed. He's got to figure out what to do next. Um, Probably go live with his son. That's I don't know. But what I do know is that I think Aragon and Sapphira are going to be on the run. Brahm's going to come and be like, "I'm going with you because you need to figure out how to be a dragon rider." And they're going to go off into training. That damsel in distress from the prologue, that's going to be their mission to go and find her or something like that. Help her escape or whatever. And then we're going to have our first boss fight at the end of the book.
There is sort of a boss fight. Yeah, but she's not.
And that's going to be his love interest.
You keep saying damsel. You might make the fans really mad. She
Listen, I get
is,
it. She's a warrior. She's an elf warrior princess. I get it. I understand it.
yeah,
But is she in distress or not?
yes.
Is she not a damsel?
That's the part I think,
Okay, well,
but that's okay.
listen, they
Um,
can roast me all they want. I'm looking up what damsel definition means.
that's
A
fair.
young unmarried woman. Is she
Oh, well,
young?
there you go.
Is she
She's
unmarried?
David,
Or is
you're
she
killing me.
betrothed?
You're asking me a bunch of
Okay,
questions I can't answer. I can't. Yeah,
all right.
not all three of those are accurate. So she's not a damsel.
Okay.
That's all I'll say about
Well,
that.
well,
But that's a wrap for our first book episode. This was super fun. Abby will be hosting us next week. Our next lore episode is going to be episode 4. So if you're wanting to tune into a very spoiler-filled episode, I actually have some notes that for lack of a better word, I'm calling notes without David, that I'll be bringing into that episode whenever we get there,
mm,
because I just can't spoil it for David's. I don't have the heart to do
yeah.
it. And there's some there's
While
some there's
while
some
also
groundwork.
while also recognizing I'm gonna be the one editing this.
We're doing our best here. Skip ahead 5 minutes, David.
Just don't add. Listen, just don't add anything extra that I'm gonna have to go into it. I can just put the intro and then the ending and then just call it a day.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was thinking. Yeah, I'm like, the
Okay.
lore episodes, listeners are just gonna get what they get
Yeah.
on the receiving end, in terms of that. But thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time on Brizinger and Aragon podcast. May your swords stay sharp.
Mischief managed.